Mr. President, colleagues, ex-presidents, and fighters for democracy and for freedom. Towards the last times of the 20th century and beginning of 21st century, for the first time in its bi-century history, all the Latin American countries were governed by democratic governments. At this time, it's this exceptional time of the democracy in Latin America. Some charismatic populist figures came up as messiahs, presenting themselves to the people, to the electors, to the countries, as those persons that were going to radically change their countries in order to assure them better democratic institutions, better life conditions, and a larger economic and social progress. That is what happened in Venezuela, in Bolivia, in Nicaragua, in Ecuador. How was it that elected presidents, elected by the people to govern according to the Constitution and the law, how is it that they would abandon this popular mandate and they would constitute governments in which the chief of state would make his all the public powers, in which institutions that are institutions of a democratic government would disappear, and then that the power, as it had happened in all the Latin American history, and it was not anything new what happened in these 2 centuries, would go into being in the hands of just one person. Well, we have many factors, but I'd like to highlight 2 that are fundamental to me. All of this was possible with the vote of the citizens. They, in the presence, pronounced themselves because these quasi-dictators, crypto-dictators, would convert themselves in such through the convocation of a constitutional assembly. And it is like this that this autocratic type of government started coming up in Latin America. And as to the type of leader and those that were in charge to defend democracy and institutions and the people, well, their parties and these social organizations, the civil population, they intervened in this process against the healthy practices and the healthy democratic institutions. In my country, in Ecuador, 80% of the persons in Ecuador voted in favor of bringing down the constitutional government and to have a constitutional assembly. I dared to ask them to reflect again and to vote against it. Only 11% heard my message. All of the others voted for this adventure that they thought that there was going to be a solution. They believed it was going to be something that would cure all the national damage. And what happened in Latin America? The governments of Latin America looked in a positive light these quasi-autocratic regimes, and they did nothing in front of a process that slowly but surely were restricting the rights and the guarantees of the citizens and were widening the powers of the President of the Republic. No one expressed any type of comment, observation to what was happening during the government of Chavez in Venezuela, Correa in Ecuador, Ortega in Nicaragua, and Morales in Bolivia. Not only this happened with the governments, but also the same happened with the OAS, the Organization of American States, that was called to defend democracy according to the charter, the mandate of the charter, the letter of democracy. And let's be frank, there was only one country, only one society, the one that really got concerned about what was happening in Ecuador. That country that have fomented the dictatorships in Latin America, that is the one that called the attention to these governments because of the way that they were abolishing the democratic institutions. And I am talking about the United States of America. The change that was produced in Latin America and in some of these countries, and the election of presidents, genuinely democratic elected, are here, and they allowed that the Grupo de Lima would be established, which was the first occasion in which Latin America as such was going to have presidents and governments and states that were concerned about what was happening in these countries. Then, following, came a new secretary of the Organization of the American States, Mr. Luis Almagro, which designation, Almagro, which then marked a change in the line that until then had been carried out to fight against the dictatorships of Morales, Ortega, Chavez. And as a consequence of it, this virtuous union of someone that was really concerned because of democracy and freedom and the joint of this person with the president, then this brought about pronouncements and political unions that for the first time allowed it to be a reality to face these dictatorships. Nothing really indeed different than other dictators and dictatorships that had happened through the history. Then President Moreno decided to opt to be loyal, of course, with the institutionals of democracy, and as a consequence to start a process that allowed our country to come out of the dictatorship and go back to democracy. There were no other limitations because the constitution, the autocratic constitution of 2008 is the one that is in force, but thanks to that political decision, Ecuador was able to carry out in this last month elections and to be elected a president of the opposition, President Guillermo Lasso. So, as I place all these considerations that I briefly express, I also would like to say that the fundamental problem of democracy in Latin America is that there is no democracy without democratic citizens. The European democracies of North America and of some Asian countries are sustained because of citizens, voters, electors that have as a substantial element of his or her participation in public life the existence and the respect for democratic institutions. And this is not the case except for some countries like Costa Rica like Chile, like Uruguay, and perhaps some others, but this is not the case of most of the Latin American countries. These Latin American countries have an empire of institution, laws, the power, the political pluralism, the free elections, the transparency of governments, and the respect of the rights and guarantees and freedoms. These are not in the minds of the citizens. And while this is so, even in the case in which we could concede that these three countries are not democratic anymore, would become democratic, the risk is always going to be there that dictatorships are going to be established again. And in that perspective, I believe that the class that it leads Latin American has made a very big mistake, because through the last decades of the 20th century and the first of 21st century, it has made the political classes into an institution and an organization in which democracy does not have to take part of. And the first step that they took, that these autocratic governments took, was to finish with the political parties that were then, and that way they brought about and imposed the will of just one person, the dictator. And so I believe that we need to bring back the value, the importance, and the need that countries have to have a political class and political parties. Precisely, its absence explains what is happening now in Peru. What happens when politics are left to adventure, circumstances, things that are unpredictable? Well, to again have in Latin America political parties, to again have in Latin America a political class is fundamental. And a last point that I'd like to mention is that Latin America is the continent that probably has had the most amount of constitutions in its history, largely over all the other countries of the world. And has it served for some good type of service that these constitutions change? Has it been better? Has it done anything better for the quality of democracy? Well, that is why I worry tremendously that in one of the countries where democracy was solid, like Chile, the convocation of a constituent assembly has now been called for, like what happened before in Venezuela, Ecuador, Bolivia, with the acceptance of the 4/5 of the electors, of the citizens of that country. Summarizing, I believe that we have to go back. We have to go back through the discourse, through the principles, for the practices and values that before, in some countries of Latin America, and most of all, in the countries that today are developed, are the ones that allowed to carry on not only sustainable societies, sustained in the Constitution, in the justice system, in the independence, but also in the day-to-day life within democracies and liberties, pluralism, and tolerance. Thank you very much.